Okay, so you ready for this? We're diving into a pretty big topic today. Gender equality in the Quran. We're going deep on your questions about some verses that often cause confusion, and our guide for this deep dive is Dr. Abla Hasan and her book, Decoding the Egalitarianism of the Quran.
Oh, I love that book. She's got some really interesting takes, and she's not afraid to challenge the usual interpretations.
Exactly. Like right off the bat, she dives into what she calls the male address fallacy.
Yeah.
It's this idea that some interpretations will take verses that were originally meant for both men and women, and then later on say, oh no, those are just for women.
Yeah, that's a big deal. It totally changes the whole meaning.
Right. So then she uses verse 4.32 as like Exhibit A.
That's the one some people use to argue that men are like inherently higher status, right?
Yeah. But Dr. Hassan's like, hold up, not so fast.
Totally. She's like, look at the language. The verse talks about men and women getting their portion of what they've earned. And she points out that the word earned means there's action involved, like you have to actually do something. It's not just given to you because you're a man or a woman.
Oh, okay. So it's like you're rewarded based on your actions and choices, not just because of your gender.
Exactly. And then the word portion, that just emphasizes the whole individual thing even more. Like your rewards, they aren't predetermined based on whether you're male or female. It all comes down to what you do, how you live your life.
That's a pretty powerful message, like God's not playing favorites based on gender.
Right. And speaking of powerful, we have to talk about verse 4.34.
The one about qiwāma.
Yeah, that's the one. Probably one of the most debated verses in the whole Qur'an.
It's the one people use to justify men being in charge, right?
Yeah, like men having authority over women. But Dr. Hasan, she wants us to look deeper. She says, what if qiwāma, instead of being about male authority, is actually about financial responsibility? And not just in general, but specifically within marriage.
Whoa, okay, now that's a plot twist. But how does she back that up? That's a pretty huge shift from how people usually understand that verse.
So it all comes down to this one word, bima. See, most people translate that as because. But Dr. Hasan, she argues that in this particular verse, in this context, it actually makes more sense to translate bima as who, and that little change, it changes everything.
Okay, I'm starting to see it. So instead of saying men are in charge because they're men, it's more like these specific men have this responsibility.
Yeah. Exactly. The ones who are fulfilling certain duties, like financially providing. And this totally ties back to verse 4.32 and that idea of everyone being responsible for their own actions and getting rewarded accordingly, regardless of whether they're male or female.
Wow, I'm seeing how this all connects now.
It's pretty amazing. She's basically saying that qiwāma isn't about one gender dominating the other. It's about partnership, about mutual support and responsibility within a marriage.
It's like a whole new way of looking at it.
Right. It's a total game changer. It really flips the script, doesn't it? Instead of qiwāma being about men having control, it's more about responsibility, care, working together.
Yeah, it's a huge shift. And I bet some listeners are thinking, okay, but what about those verses that literally say men are a degree above women?
Right, right. Dr. Hasan tackles that one head on. She talks about verse 2.228 and how people bring that one up a lot. But she makes this really important point. That verse, it's specifically about divorce.
Oh, interesting. So it's not about men and women in general. It's about their rights and responsibilities within a specific situation.
Exactly. Context is key.
Totally.
Yeah.
We can't just be taking verses out of context and be like, whoa, see?
Yeah.
Told ya.
Yeah. So how does she handle that whole degree thing then?
It all comes down to this word, daraja, usually translated as degree. People see that and think, boom, men are automatically higher.
Yeah.
But Dr. Hasan, she digs into it. She says in this context, daraja is more about reward.
Yeah.
Like if a man steps up and fulfills certain obligations, especially financially, after a divorce, then he gets this daraja. It's not automatic just because he's a man. So it's not about men being inherently better. It's more like if you do this specific thing, then there's a reward.
Exactly. You got it. And again, this goes back to her whole thing with qiwāma, right? It's about what you do, not who you are. Individual responsibility, not some predetermined hierarchy based on gender.
I've seen all these connections now. It's really cool how she ties it all together.
And here's another thing people get wrong about these verses. They think that if men are responsible for, finances, that automatically means women have to be subservient everywhere else.
Like it's some kind of zero-sum game.
Exactly. But Dr. Hasan says, nope. She's very clear that the Quran values all kinds of qualities, what we might call masculine and feminine, but it doesn't say, okay, men get these ones and women, you're stuck with these. It's more about recognizing that everyone brings something unique to the table.
It's about everyone's worth and dignity.
Exactly.
I love that. So I imagine this is kind of a controversial take, right? Challenging these traditional interpretations. Has she gotten any, like, pushback for this?
Oh, definitely. I mean, this is big stuff, but it's really interesting to see how people are responding. On the one hand, you have a lot of scholars, especially more progressive ones, who are really excited about her work. They say it's about time somebody challenged these old patriarchal interpretations.
Yeah, some of those interpretations have been used to justify some not so great stuff over the years.
For sure. And these scholars, they see Dr. Hassan's work as super important for that reason. Like, it's opening up all these new possibilities for understanding gender roles within Islam.
So she's got people in her corner.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. It's not like she's out there on her own.
Oh, not at all. There's a whole bunch of scholars, especially women, who are doing similar work. Like, they're looking at these texts with fresh eyes, taking into account the historical context, thinking about the language in new ways. It's really exciting.
It's a whole movement.
Totally. But then on the flip side, you have some of the more, let's say, traditional scholars. They're not so happy about it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They say she's like reading too much into things, that she's trying to force a modern Western feminist perspective onto something that should be understood within its own historical context.
Which is a fair point.
Right.
I mean, we always have to be careful about imposing our own views on the past, right? So how does Dr. Hasan respond to that?
Well, she's really clear that she's not saying throw out all the traditional interpretations. It's more like, let's look at these with fresh eyes. Let's ask some hard questions and see if maybe, just maybe, some of these interpretations, even if they were well-intentioned, maybe they were influenced by the social norms of their time, you know?
Oh, absolutely. We can't escape that, right? Like, our understanding of everything, even sacred texts, is always going to be filtered through our own experiences in the time we're living in.
Exactly. And that's what makes these conversations so important.
So it's not about creating division. It's about understanding and growth.
Exactly. And ultimately, she says her goal is to create a more inclusive and nuanced understanding of Islam, one that respects everyone's dignity, regardless of gender.
I love that. That's something I think we can all get behind. So all this is great in theory, but how does this actually play out in real life? Did she give any examples of how these different views on qiwāma have affected people?
Absolutely. That's a key part of her argument. She says that these misinterpretations of qiwāma, they've been used to justify denying women opportunities in education, in the workplace, even within their own families.
Whoa, so this isn't just some abstract debate. This has real-world consequences.
Big time. She talks about cases where women have been denied the right to a divorce, even in situations where they're being abused, all because of this idea that qiwāma gives men all the power in a marriage.
Oh, wow. That's heartbreaking.
Right. And it's not just about personal freedom either, it's about economic justice too. She points out that some interpretations of qiwāma have been used to deny women their inheritance rights or to prevent them from controlling their own finances, even when they're perfectly capable of doing so.
It's like a cycle of inequality.
Exactly. And to be fair, she does acknowledge that not all interpretations of qiwāma are bad, you know? She says some interpretations emphasize mutual respect and cooperation within marriage. But she really stresses how important it is to look at these interpretations with a critical eye, especially when they're being used to justify treating people unfairly.
Right. It's all about context and intention, and being willing to challenge the status quo, even when it's uncomfortable.
100%. And she says this is where education and open dialogue are crucial. We need to reclaim the narrative and make sure that diverse voices are being heard.
Absolutely. Because these interpretations, they need to reflect the lived experiences of all Muslims.
Yes, exactly.
It's so important to have those conversations, to keep those lines of communication open. And you mentioned earlier that Dr. Hasan's work is part of this like bigger conversation happening within Islamic scholarship, and especially among female scholars. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, for sure. It's actually really inspiring to see what's happening right now. There's this whole new generation of Muslim women scholars who are doing some seriously groundbreaking work on gender and Islam.
That's amazing.
Right. And they come from all kinds of backgrounds, too. Like some of them were trained in more traditional Islamic settings, while others come from, secular universities. But the cool thing is they're all united by this desire to engage with the Qur'an and Islamic tradition in a way that's both intellectually rigorous, but also relevant to the lives of Muslims today.
So they're not afraid to, ask the hard questions.
Oh, definitely not. They're like, okay, how can we understand these verses in a way that promotes gender justice? How can we create a more inclusive and equitable Islam?
Wow, those are big questions.
They really are. But these women are tackling them head on, and they're doing it with such incredible courage and intellectual depth. It's really amazing to witness.
It really is.
Yeah.
Like, they're reclaiming these narratives.
Yeah.
They're not waiting for permission anymore. They're taking their rightful place at the table. And that's powerful.
It is. And the impact is huge. Because they're not just writing for like other academics, you know, they're engaging with communities, giving lectures, writing books for a wider audience, using social media to get their message out there. Some of them are even involved in activism.
Oh, wow. So they're really making their voices heard.
Absolutely. And it's making a difference. Like, it's changing the way people understand these texts, but it's also changing the way they live their lives.
And that's what it's all about, right? Like, real change, tangible change.
Exactly. And here's the thing. This isn't just about women. Like, when we challenge these rigid gender roles and we work towards a more just and equitable society, everybody benefits.
That's such an important point. It's not about men versus women. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and creating a world where everyone has the chance to thrive.
Yes, exactly. And Dr. Hasan's work, it really drives that point home. Like, she reminds us that interpreting these texts, it's not a one and done kind of thing. It's an ongoing process.
And it's a responsibility that we all share, right? We can't just passively accept the interpretations that we've been given. We have to engage with these texts ourselves, use our own reason, our own compassion to find meaning that feels true to us.
Perfectly said.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, we want to leave you with this question. What resonates with you? How do you understand these verses now? And what will you do with this knowledge moving forward?
It's a conversation that we should all be a part of.
Thank you so much for joining us today on this deep dive into Dr. Abla Hasan's incredible work. We hope this has sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to continue exploring these vital questions. Until next time, keep asking, keep learning, and keep striving for a more just and equitable world for everyone.